Record
Wonderful.
to the cloud.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yay!
Yay, we're good. Cool. Okay, everybody. Hi. So this is why is that popping up like that? Let me share one time. So my name is Ryan Burge. I am an author and I'm also a pastor. I've been a pastor of an American Baptist church for most of my adult life. And this is the book. Uh, this is the second edition that just came out in May, called The Nuns, Where They Came From, Who They Are, and Where They're Going. So I'm going to talk about today is some of the graphs and some of the analysis from that work. So um, as all good research projects do, this one started with a tweet. I was a very typical traditional academic for a long time, published articles in peer-reviewed journals that no one read except about 12 people who went to conferences with me. Wasn't very accessible to the general public. And so then at one point I decided I wanted to write more for a general audience. And so I tweeted out this tweet. I'll show you that graph in a bigger version in just a second. I tweeted that tweet out and it just went crazy viral. Um, my life changed overnight. I talk about that in the first chapter of the book. I went from someone who had basically never spoken to the media before to having to schedule my phone calls with the national media and international media, because this graph showed that the nuns now were larger than any other religious group in America, and the first time that's happened. And everyone seemingly wanted to talk about the rise of non-religion in America, and they, for whatever reason, saw me as the person who could help them understand that and write stories about that. So uh, it went on, CNN's homepage. It was on the New York Post. It was in the New York Times and the Washington Post. The exact same graph was replicated by both organizations. The Times of London called me. I was talking to everyone on earth. I was on the front page of Reddit, which is this social media community. It got 70,000 upvotes. I had people that I went to high school with 20 years ago say, "Hey, I saw you on Reddit." So my life changed very, very quickly. And so when it came to when a book publisher approached me about writing a book, they said, "Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got an idea because I know what people want to read about. I mean, it's clear to me from the data that people want to read about the nuns." And so I began to write a book about the nuns, and that's what became the first edition, which came out in 21, and then the second edition, which came out in 23. So this is that graph, just a bigger version of it. We separate American religion into 7 categories. There are 3 types of Protestants: evangelical, mainline, and black. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, why we have those distinctions. And there's Catholics, and other faith groups, and Jews, and then the nuns. And as you can obviously see, the story here is this purplish, pinkish line that goes up and to the right. We'll talk about that in quite a bit more detail in just a second. And then this mainline line we'll talk about as well in just a second. So this is the share of Americans who identify as evangelical, and this is based on what kind of church they attend. So if you say you're Southern Baptist or Assemblies of God, then we sort you into the evangelical category. You don't actually, sometimes people don't even know what the word evangelical is, but they're evangelical because they go to an evangelical church. In 1972, 17% of all American adults were evangelical. The absolute peak of American evangelicalism was in 1993, when about 30% of all American adults identified as evangelical. It's never been that high before or since 1993. There's this weird kind of like period where evangelicalism explodes throughout the mid 1980s and early 1990s. It really just kind of takes off. And then from that point forward, it sort of returns back to the mean, I would say. And then the last couple of years, you've seen a slow and steady decline in evangelicalism. But there's more evangelicals in America today than there were in 1972. There's actually 75 million American evangelicals today. There were only 45 million in 1972. So, evangelicalism is doing just fine. I know you probably read reports that say it's like dying or whatever. No, it's actually doing relatively okay in a very turbulent religious environment. This is the main line. This is you guys and me as well. Mainline Protestant Christianity. That is United Methodist Episcopalians, United Church of Christ, ELCA, PCUSA, Disciples, and ABC USA, which is American Baptist Church, which is what I am. Remember the ABC USA. Um, there's data that I've seen that goes back to the 1950s. It says about 52% of all Americans were mainline Protestant in the late 1950s. It was the most dominant form of religion we've had in the last 100 years, but it's not that way anymore. Uh, Mainline Protestant Christianity was around 30% of America in the 1970s. And from that point forward, just has continued to decline. It dropped below 20% by the late 1980s, and then it just kind of continues to slide off the table every single year. Now, about 1 in 10 American adults are mainline Protestant. It was over 50% of America in the 1950s, and now it's about 10% of America today. It's probably one of the most significant shifts in American religion in the last 75 or 100 years. And I think it's going to continue to go down from here for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, just sorry, guys, look at the screen. Y'all got gray hair. I mean, statistically, the main line is not young. In fact, if you did a random sample of 1,000 Americans, I would be shocked if you got more than 20 of them who are mainline Protestants between the ages of 18 and 35. About 1.5% of all Americans are mainline Protestant between the ages of 18 and 35. Not good. It's not going to get better, it looks like. I hate to be a prophet of doom, and people go, why are you so mean to the mainline? I'm mainline, okay? Like, I'm dancing on my own grave here. But the data is the data, and it is what it is, and it's definitely not good for the mainline. The Catholics, this graph, I showed them. I've done a lot of talks at different Catholic institutions. I show them this graph, and they go, yay, look how good we're doing. And they are. They're actually doing relatively well. It's still, even today, about 22, 23% of Americans identify as Catholic, which is relatively robust. It's down a little bit from the peak, but not a ton. Catholics have been very, very steady the last 50 years, right? Between 23 and 27%. But what they don't want to hear is this: the share of Catholics who attend Mass every week was over 50% in the 1970s, and now it's about 22% of Catholics attend Mass every week. So the top number looks good. Below the surface looks really bad because there's just less devotion. Catholicism has become like a cultural moniker, not really a mark of religious devotion like evangelicalism is, let's say. And this obviously is why we're all here, the rise of the nuns. This graph stops in 2018, but I'll tell you some numbers, more recent numbers I have. About 5% of Americans were nuns in 1972, 1 in 20. There's actually, I read this really interesting article called, it was published in 1968. It was called The Nuns, the Neglected Category. Because no one was writing about the nuns in 1968 because you couldn't, because there were hardly any of them in America in 1968. There just wasn't a good sample size. And if you see here, even through the 80s and even into the early 1990s, the share of Americans who were nuns kind of hung around between 5 and 7% that entire time. But from that point forward, 1991 is the inflection point, and it just went boom and up into the right. And so now every year, every 2 years, the nuns rise by a point or two. So today, the share of Americans who are nuns is probably around 30%. This is like 6 different estimates of the nuns based on different surveys. Everyone surveys a little differently on this topic. Everyone asks the question a little bit differently. Everyone offers some different response options. The lowest estimate of the nuns is 21%. The highest estimate is 36%. Obviously, that's a lot of difference. The consensus view amongst folks who work in this area is probably about 30% of Americans are non-religious today. That seems to be the most realistic estimate of the nuns. So about 30%, from 5% in 1972 to 30% of Americans today have no religion. I think it's the largest cultural shift in my lifetime and maybe the last 100 years. I think it's impacting every aspect of American society and culture and politics, and you name it. There's very little. It's hard to name a sector of American life that's not been affected by the rise of the nuns. So about 30% of Americans are nuns today. So why is this happening? This is the question that actually kind of motivated the book, because I got asked that a ton. And I wish I could tell you there's like one simple reason why the nuns are rising as quickly as they are, but there is not. It's actually incredibly complicated. There are a myriad of reasons, and I think I go through 8 of them in the book, but I'll kind of condense that for this presentation. But it's not just one thing. It's not just 2 things. It's actually probably a lot of things working in concert. So the first one is something called secularization theory. And this is if you take sociology, religion in college, you're going to spend a week talking about secularization theory. It's just the simple idea that as a society becomes more educated and economically prosperous, it becomes less religious. The theory here is that human beings they want to explain things or find explanations for things. So imagine you were moving into an agricultural society in the Fertile Crescent, 2,000 years before Christ, and it doesn't rain for 6 months and all your crops die and your family dies of starvation. Why? Right? Like, why did it not rain and why are we all dying? Or why did my wife die in childbirth? Or why did my son get cancer? Or why are all these things happening? Back in the day, you would say it's because God's cursing us. God's mad at us. And so therefore, that's why all these bad things are befalling us. The theory here is that the more science you have, the less God you need. That science explains why it doesn't rain, and science explains why your wife died in childbirth or your son died after he coughed twice. So the more science you have, the less God you need. And so the more educated you get, economically prosperous you get, the explanations now shift from divine to mechanistic and rational, based on science and the scientific process. This is really extolled by a guy named Max Weber, a German sociologist. He called it this German word. I'm not going to say it because I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not German. This is the way it's translated into English, oftentimes disenchantment. But there's actually another translation that I thought is really interesting, which is demagication, which is just the idea that science demagicated life. Now we don't need a divine explanation for why it didn't rain. We have science and meteorology and climatology that will describe to us why it won't rain and why it will rain. So that's one. Then there's Karl Marx. I mean, I don't want to go too far into Karl Marx, obviously, but Karl Marx was a big believer in the class struggle, and he thought religion was used as a tool to keep people in their poverty and happy in their poverty. He would say there's a reason why slave owners don't let their slaves learn how to read. That way they can kind of be stuck in their own station in life and not be able to move up. And he famously said that, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And so what Weber or what Marx said was basically, if you get more education, you don't need religion. And so the reason we keep you dumb is because then we can use religion as a tool to keep you down and keep you happy in your poverty and your slavery. So that's one big theory. Now, if you want to look for evidence of this, Weber and Marx would look at Western Europe and go, yeah, look, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is the share of a bunch of countries in Europe, how often they attend, what percentage of the population attends church every week. Poland's obviously a huge outlier there, 44% of Poles. Poland's a fascinating country because it's an Eastern Bloc country, was communist for 50 years, should be really irreligious because of that, but it actually is the most religious country in Europe. 44% of Poles attend church every week. For comparison's sake, by the way, about 25% of Americans report weekly attendance. So we're in the same sort of category as Portugal and Italy and Ireland. But there's a bunch of countries in Europe that are way less religious than us. For instance, it's 13% of Spaniards and 9% of Belgians and 8% of Germans. And then you get to the Scandinavian countries and it gets really small. 5% in Sweden and 4% in Finland and Denmark. Denmark is only 3% of Danes go to church every week. And so Weber and Marx would look at that and go, yeah, look, yeah, secularization, look at that happening. Boom, that's what's supposed to happen. They got educated, they don't need God anymore, and they're walking away from religion. So, and if you look at a scatter plot, this is GDP on the x-axis, which is just a measure of economic output. And this is the share saying religion is very important. There's a whole bunch of countries that are very poor and very religious. Nigeria and Jordan and Ghana and Liberia and Ethiopia, and all up here in this cluster. But then as you go more towards higher income countries, like the Western European countries I just mentioned, like Belgium and Finland and Denmark and Sweden, they are a whole lot less religious. They're way down here on the scale. Around 10 or 15% say religion is very important. And then look at the United States. One of these things is not like the other. We are an incredibly rich country, but we're an incredibly religious country. If we were as religious as we should be, based on the scatter plot, we should have the religion of Norway, because we basically have the economy of Norway. And in Norway, only about 20% of Norwegians say religion is very important. In America, it's 52% say religion is very important. So we should be a whole lot less religious than we are based on the data. And then, Weber and Marx say, yeah, but we're on the way. We're headed that direction. We're going to be Norway in 30 or 40 years because that's what secularization theory would predict. So that's one thing. Another thing is social desirability bias, which is the idea that we get lied to when we give surveys all the time. Imagine that you are in a mall and someone comes up to you and says, I'll give you $20 to do a survey. And you say, okay, sure, fine. They take you in a room in the back and they start asking you questions, kind of innocuous questions about, gender and race and education, things like that. Then they ask you, more difficult questions like, oh, I don't know, do you masturbate, or are black people lazy, or have you ever cheated on your spouse, or do you do drugs, or should a woman be president? There's all kinds of areas that we know that people lie about, particularly sex, drugs, racist views, sexist views. Those are a lot of the areas in which there's a lot of social desirability bias. But one of the biggest areas that we know for certain is religion. People lie about religion constantly. We actually know this to be true. So this really basic question about how often do you go to church? So in 1991, this guy named Kirk Hadaway and his research team went to a little county in Ohio called Ashtabula County, which is just a really kind of like typical Midwestern county. They did a survey, a mail survey of 1,000 people living in Ashtabula County, and they asked them that simple question: how often do you go to church? And so they got the results back. And what they found was a significant number of people said they went to church every week. It was about 36%. So they were weekly attenders. And then the research team said, okay, let's just check. So they got the phone book out and they called every church, house of worship in Ashtabula County, talked to the pastor and said, how many people do you have in church, like on a typical Sunday? And started putting together a spreadsheet. And for the pastors that didn't answer the phone, they drove the parking lot of the church on Sunday morning and counted cars and created a little formula, like maybe like 1.5 people per one car. And they got all that together and did all those calculations. And what they found was that once they did verifications, only about 20% of Ashtabula County was in church on an average Sunday. So maybe what that actually means in reality is that we've always been more nunny than we are, but we've just lied about it for a long time. That maybe what's happening is not a change in American society, but a revealing of what's always been going on in American society, because we've moved our surveys from face to face to online, and people are more willing to say what they really think to a web browser than they are to another human being. So people who, would say, oh yeah, I go to church, because they want to look good to the eyes of the interviewer. Online, I'll go, nah, I don't go at all. Who cares? And click no, and then move to the next box. So maybe what we're seeing actually is just a revealing of what we've seen for a long, long time. So, and then we have to talk about politics just briefly. I'm a political scientist by training, so that obviously informs a lot of what I do. It's a complicated thing, politics and religion, obviously. The one theory that you've probably heard about religion and politics is the culture war, which is essentially the idea that the Republican Party became the party of anti-abortion and anti-gay and anti-trans and anti-pornography, and that kind of divided the electorate up. That's sort of the classic understanding of religion and politics over the last 50 years, is the culture war really is what predicated where we are today. And there's still some cachet to that. I think it's sort of fallen out of favor a little bit, but not a bunch. It's still kind of always looming in the background. But there are other theories of what's happened in American religion and politics. One is by a guy named Randall Balmer, who's a Dartmouth professor of religion. He wrote this piece for Politico, which actually turned into a book that came out a year or two ago called The Real Origins of the Religious Right. And he says that he thinks it's not about culture at all, it's about race. And so he tells the story of a little county in Mississippi called Holmes County. Brown versus Board, 1954, said that all schools in America had to be desegregated. Blacks and whites had to go to school together. And in Holmes County, Mississippi, they fought that for over 10 years, but eventually they lost in court and had to integrate the public school. Once that happened, a group of parents started a private Christian school. And within 2 years of that private Christian school starting, not a single white child went to the public school in Holmes County, Mississippi. They all went to the private Christian school. Well, the IRS steps in and revokes the tax-exempt status of that private Christian school, saying that we know what you're doing. You're basically starting to sidestep Brown versus Board, and we don't like it. So we're going to and then on top of that, Bob Jones University, which was deeply segregated. By the way, it was in Bob Jones. In 2000, a white student could not date a black student in the year 2000 at Bob Jones University. They revoked their tax exempt status as well. And so what Balmer says is it wasn't about culture, it was about race. It was about white people basically wanting to segregate themselves and being mad at the government for not allowing them to do so. And they were using the cloak of religion, saying this is not about black and white. This is about religious freedom, that my school should be able to have whatever kind of students we want to have, and you can't step on our freedom of religion. So Balmer makes it about race, not about culture. And then there's a really interesting book that came out probably 10 years ago called One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Created Christian America, by Kevin Kruse, who's a Princeton historian. And he basically argues about capitalism, that the religious right really kind of was buttressed by capitalist forces. If you know anything about American religious history and Billy Graham specifically, William Randolph Hearst was a huge fan of Billy Graham. He actually told his reporters to, quote, puff Graham in newspapers because he wanted his message to get out, because he knew that Billy Graham was friendly to capitalism. A really interesting story that Kruse tells in that book is they had a sermon writing contest in the 1950s. You had to write the best sermon you could that extolled the Christian virtues of capitalism. And if you won, you got a prize of $10,000. There were over 5,000 pastors across America who wrote a sermon about why capitalism was great. Now, not all of them won money, obviously, but all of them spent time to write a sermon about capitalism. And I can tell you as a pastor, I'm not going to write a sermon and throw it away. So it's very, very likely that sermon contest exposed a lot of Americans to the virtues of capitalism from a Christian perspective because of the money that these rich robber barons put into this process. So what Kruse says, it's really was capitalism co-opted Christianity to drive republicanism and support for free markets, which is an interesting theory that you don't hear a whole ton. And then there's obviously the Christian nationalism argument. I'm not going to go too deeply into that. There's other scholars who do a much better job than me. It's just the idea that that America is a white Christian country and should stay that way, and we should fight all that we can for white Christian values. So what's the end result of that? It's this. This is the share of nuns by political ideology. Okay. Obviously, we call this the Pew Gap or the God Gap. It's the idea that the nuns are way more likely to be liberal, and conservative people are way more likely to be religious. Today, about 12% of conservatives are nuns. Amongst liberals, it's over 50% of liberals are nuns. I think it's astounding. And Joe Biden's voting coalition in 2020 was 45% nuns. 45%. I think there's a very good chance in 24, 28 that half of the Democratic coalition is going to be non-religious voters. So it's definitely playing itself out in the data that to be liberal is to be non-religious, and to be conservative is to be religious. That's the way that we understand, at least the way that the average person understands politics, especially if you're white. It works a little less clearly if you're non-white, but that's a different story. So other theories, just quickly: the internet, the atomization of American society, the decline of trust, obviously with the Catholic Church scandal, the SBC scandal, all that stuff. The evolution of the American family, including the child-free movement and the rapid increase in divorce. All those have radically, changed American society. And I talk about those in the book in more depth, but I'll skip over those for now. So let's see what we have here. Let's skip that. We don't got time. I want to give you guys plenty of time for questions. So let's talk about the demographics of disaffiliation really quick. So this is the graph that a lot of people really latch on to, which is this is the religious composition of every generation in America today. The silent generation are people born between 1925 and 1945, which means they're dying rapidly. Just actuarially, that's the case. 50% of them are Protestants and 22% are Catholics, so 71% of them are Christians. Very few of them are atheists. Only 6% of them identify as atheists, and then 12% identify as agnostic. So 18% nuns, 71% Christians. So pretty good ratio from Christians to nuns. But then if you look at every successive generation, the share of Protestants drops precipitously. Amongst Catholics, it also drops, but much more slowly. So now amongst Generation Z, which are people born 1996 or later, they're all in their late teens, early 20s, the ones that we survey, adults, 18 and older. Only 22% of them are Protestant, and only 15% of them are Catholic. So now 37% of them are nuns, or I'm sorry, are Christians. And then 32% are nothing in particular. and 13% are atheist agnostic. So now you have 45% of American Gen Z are nuns, and only 37% are Christians. So they're the first generation in American history, as far as we can tell, where the nuns are clearly outnumbering the Christians. And what's happening in America every day is that members of the silent generation, the boomers, are dying off in mass. And every day in America, thousands of young people are coming of age from Generation Z. And this is actually how religion is probably changing the fastest, is that generational replacement. Old people die and are replaced by young people. And young people are less religious than old people. And that is how American religion is shifting over time. It's not massive amounts of people leaving religion, which is happening, but it's probably more generational replacement than switching. So this is really driving the conversation more than a lot of people give it credit for. So this is what American religion looks like right now. About 34% of Americans say they're Protestant. The second most likely option is nothing in particular. 23% of Americans say they're nothing in particular. I'll talk about those people in just a second. 18% are Catholic, and then nobody else is even close to that. The next closest group is atheist at 6%. Something else is at 7%. Amongst young people, 18 to 22, the most popular option is nothing in particular. 1 in 3 American college students say they're nothing in particular now. Not Protestant, not Catholic, not atheist either. Nothing in particular. 1 in 3 are nothing in particular. So we'll skip that, skip that, skip that, skip that. Okay, so this is, I really like this graph because it kind of shows you what's happening here in America. These are birth cohorts down here at the bottom. So these are people born between 1950 and 1954. And these people being born between 1975 and 1979. The red bars are people who said they were raised in a non-religious household. So, for instance, only 4% of people born in the 1950s, early 1950s, were raised in a non-religious household, just 4%. But when they were 18 to 25 years old, 13% of them had no religious affiliation. So that means that most nuns here are created. They're not raised that way. But what you see over time is the red bars get taller and the blue bars get taller. So now about 15% of people, younger people, are being raised in non-religious households. But then about 30% of them are nuns by their 25th birthday. So for every one nun that's raised, there's another nun created at some point in their life up to their 25th birthday. So it's both a process of more and more people are being raised nuns, but it's also a process of more people are becoming nuns as they move into adulthood. So it's a both and process. And what's going to happen over time is more and more people are going to be raised in non-religious households. So the baseline for the nuns is going to continue to rise because of that. So some things that shock people, though, that they don't understand about American religion. This is the share of people who identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular by level of education. There's this theory out there that I just told you about, secularization theory, which argues that the more education you have, the less religious you are. Wrong answer. Actually, the more education you have, the more likely you are to be religious. And that's been true in every year of the cooperative election study going back to 2008. And these are huge samples, by the way, 30, 40, 50,000 people. So the people, you got to get out of your mind the mentality that religion is just only for uneducated or, it's hillbillies that are in church. That's just not what's happening at all. It's the educated people that are there. And this is even a bigger sample, 477,000 people. And I like this because it's broken down by type of degree even more. The group that's the least likely to be nuns are people with master's degrees, 20%. The people that are the most likely to be nuns are people with a high school diploma, 32%. And actually, 24% of people with doctorates are nuns, which is the same share of people with a 4-year college degree. So you got to change your perception of what the nuns are. It's not a bunch of uneducated folks. It's actually the nuns are uneducated. The educated folks are the ones who are coming to religion or being part of religion. Now, this is gender, and this is fascinating. So this is birth year. So younger people are over on this side and older people are over on this side. There's always been a gender gap when it comes to religion. Men are more likely to be non-religious compared to women. And that's been true for decades now. And you can see the gap. It's been 2, 3, 4 percentage points for a long, long time. But look amongst the youngest adults, people born in 1990 or later, men are less likely to be nuns now, and women are more likely to be nuns now. So actually, young women are leaving religion faster than young men are. So, this gender gap that's existed for a long, long time is now kind of gone the opposite direction. I don't know why yet. I'm working on it, but I think it's an interesting kind of thread to keep in our heads as we move forward about gender in religion. Race. This is a share that were nuns in 2008 and then 2021. Couple things real quick I want to point out. The group that's the most likely to be nuns now are Asian by a significant margin. But white and black, used to be white people were more likely to be nuns than black, and now it's the same, 36% for both. Hispanics are the least likely. Only 33% of Hispanics are nuns. So they're actually the most religious racial group in America today is Hispanics. The least is Asian. And then white and black are in the middle and sort of together, right around the same level, about 36%. So let's get to, there's three types of nuns: atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular. I think this is where the analysis shines a little bit. So this is the proportion of those three groups over the last 14 years or so. Most nuns, and this is really, really important, most nuns are nothing in particular. That's actually what the category says, nothing in particular. They're not atheist, agnostic, but they're also not Protestant or Catholic either. The way we understand this is atheists or agnostics are secular people. What that means is they've thrown off a religious label, okay, and embraced a secular label, which is based on science and reason and logic and all those things. Nothing in particulars are non-religious people because they've thrown off religion, but they haven't replaced it with anything else. So they're not religious, but they're not secular either, and they are the largest portion of the nuns. If you put 5 nuns in a room, 1 will be an atheist, 1 will be an agnostic, and 3 will be nothing in particular. So most nuns are nothing in particular, and no one talks about this group, and they should, because I think it's incredibly important for America in a whole bunch of ways. So, by the way, there's this whole theory that like people will come back to religion as they get married and have kids. So I looked at people born just between 1983 and 1988, which means they were young-ish in the first survey. They were between 20 and 25 in the first survey, and now they're in their late 30s. So exactly the time you would get married and have kids and stabilize your life. Well, guess what? They're more likely to be nuns today than they were in 2008. So there's no evidence that like people are returning to religion during certain life stages. They're just up and out and continuing to go up and out. So 51% of atheists have a 4-year college degree. It's 46% of agnostics have a 4-year college degree. They're some of the most educated people in America, atheists and agnostics. But then look here at the bottom. These are your nothing in particulars. Only 23% of nothing in particulars have a 4-year college degree. They're the least educated. 51% versus 23% is not even on the same planet with each other. So it's really weird that we put them together in the same category because demographically it makes no sense to do that. And here's an even worse statistic. The nothing in particulars have been falling further and further behind when it comes to education. So in the entire sample, the share who had a bachelor's degree was 25% in 2008, went to 34% in 2022. So plus 9. Atheists went from 33% to 51%. Agnostics went from 35 to 46. So they've gone up 11 points. But look at our nothing in particulars. They only went up 7 points during that time period. So not only were they the lowest educated group, their education level is growing slower than the general population. So they're falling further behind when it comes to education. So not only are they at the bottom, they're staying at the bottom for the foreseeable future. This is income. I know it's shocking, but nothing in particulars. 60% of nothing in particulars make less than $50,000 a year. In the general population, it's 50%. Amongst atheists, it's only 40%. So nothing in particulars have very low incomes. Only 13% make 6 figures. So this is household too, not just individual. So even worse. You put it together, and here's what you get. This is the share of people who make $50,000 a year or less and have a high school diploma or less. So low education, low income. That describes 32% of nothing in particulars, highest of any group. Amongst agnostics and atheists, it's only 12%. So again, to put these people in the same category is just doing malpractice, I think, because they're so different demographically, SES wise. And if you look at like other stuff like political engagement, the question was, have you done any of the following things in the last 12 months? And this is during the 2020 presidential election year. So if you're going to get geared up for politics, this was the year for you to do it. And by the way, COVID kind of suppresses these numbers a bit. They're going to go up quite a bit in 24. 11% of atheists went to a political meeting. It was 5% of nothing in particulars. 27% of atheists put up a political yard sign or bumper sticker. It was 14% of nothing in particulars. Atheists are twice as likely to work on a campaign. They're over twice as likely to attend a protest or march. They're 20 points more likely to contact a public official. Half of atheists gave money to a candidate or campaign in 2020. Half. Amongst white evangelicals, it was 26%, by the way. Atheists are the most politically engaged group in America today. Nothing in particular, it was only 22%. So by all these metrics, nothing in particular are checked out of the political system. They're checked out of the educational system. I call them the left out, the left behind, the lost, the unmoored people in American life. They don't have any social connection. They're not engaging in the process. But here are some other things about them that's really interesting. So this is religious attendance. 84% of nothing in particulars attend church never or seldom. It's 95% of agnostics and 97% of atheists. So they're slightly more religious than the other types of nuns. Okay, they're not quite as nunny as an atheist is, for instance. Here's what even gets more interesting. This is how important is religion to you? Okay, amongst atheists, I know you're shocked by this. 95% said religion's not important at all. Amongst agnostics, it's 76% said religion's not important at all. But look at this. Amongst nothing in particulars, this category here, only 43% said religion's not important at all, and 24% said it's not too important. But look here, 21% said it's somewhat important, and 11% said it's very important. So actually 1/3 of nothing in particulars say religion is somewhat or very important to them. So like there's a huge group of these people who are actually somewhat warm-ish to religion. Atheist agnostics are not that way. They are not warm towards religion. They're basically turned off to religion. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is called panel data, where we ask the same people the same questions over a long period of time so we can track change at the individual level. So we ask them in 2011, what is your religious affiliation? Then we ask them in 2020, what was your religious affiliation? This is how this works. Amongst atheists who were atheists in 2011, 78% of them were still atheists in 2020. They're in, almost all atheists stay atheists. The ones who leave, 9% now say they're agnostic, and 9% now say they're nothing in particular. So 96% of atheists are nuns 9 years later, okay? For the ones who leave, 3% go to another faith group, a non-Christian group, and 1% become Christians. 1%. One. I know you love hearing the stories about, like, I was an atheist and now I'm a Christian. You are 1 in a million, statistically. Like, that is not something that happens a whole lot. Now, agnostics are across the bottom. 53% are still agnostics. 22% are nothing in particular, and 16% are atheists, okay? Only 2% go to another faith group, and only 6% become Christians. Okay, that's still better than 1%, but it's certainly not good. But look at this top row up here, okay? Amongst nothing in particulars, 61% still nothing in particular, 10% become agnostic, and 6% become atheist. But then look at this. 8% move to another faith group, and 15% become Christians. So think about this from a numerical standpoint. This box here is 1% of 6% of the population. That's 0.06% of the population are atheists who become Christians. This is 15% of 23% of the population. This is almost 4% of America is in this box. And this is 0.06% of America. So which one's a better ROI? For every one person here, there are over 500 here. So focusing on nothing in particulars is the way to go, because these atheists aren't coming back. And Philip Yancey, the famous Christian author, once said, no one becomes a Christian because they lost the argument. Debating atheists is a fun thing for academics to do. It actually has almost no impact on the number of people who come to church at all. So it's an intellectual exercise completely. This is what I think American religion looks like. Atheist agnostics are sort of on this far left over here. In the middle are nothing in particular, and then religion's over here. I think nothing in particular is sort of the way station between the nuns and between religion. Most people go through that step to get to the other side. They don't hop from evangelical to atheist or atheist to evangelical. They go through sort of middle territory. And so to me, this is where the battle is being fought in American religion right now. It's like the transfer station. There's trains going left, there's trains going right. Which train are you going to get on? And there's more and more people standing on that platform every year, which is the nothing in particular platform. So I'll finish one last slide, and then we can talk about questions and answers. One thing that I've come to realize is that religion, secularization is a lot like globalization. Every politician on planet Earth tries to say, I'm going to bring jobs back to America, and they're doing a very poor job of that. Maybe because you can't. Maybe because globalization is this force that you can't stop. There are more people in West Virginia who work in Dollar General than work in coal mines now. You cannot stop the forces that are changing American society, no matter how hard you try. And so we have a lot of headwinds in American society right now, and when it comes to religion. And so I think secularization and globalization have a lot in common. You can fight all you want, but the headwinds are going to kind of restrict your ability to be successful. Why was Billy Graham so successful? Well, because he was preaching the gospel when the baby boomers were being born and coming of age. He had a whole crop of people he could preach to. It's not like that anymore. So be realistic, right, about your abilities as a pastor, as a Christian, to do the work that you're supposed to do. If there's 60 million nuns in America, that's a spreadsheet. This is what I look at all day. I have to constantly tell myself that there are 60 million nuns. Everybody has a story. And the story that I told you is what, these are broad swaths, and I'm generalizing, but your story might be different than other nuns' stories. I've heard a lot of stories. You hear every excuse in the book, by the way, from like, I'm gay and I grew up evangelical. I'm like, oh God, okay, leave. Like, don't stay in a church that tells you you're not worth, you're sinning. To, oh, the pastor got a different haircut and I didn't like it, so I didn't go back. So the nuns run the gambit from really, really like significant philosophical issues, theological issues, to I just didn't like it. Everyone has a different story, right? Pastors, and I tell every pastor this, and they get mad at me, and I don't care. Stop being partisan. Stop using your Facebook page as a way to advertise for a certain party or campaign. Michael Jordan was once asked, why are you not more political? And he had a really great response. He said, because Republicans buy sneakers too. Simple as that. The gospel is for everyone, at least the way I understand it. The gospel came to save Democrats and Republicans and those nutty Green Party and libertarians as well. All belong in the kingdom of God in one way or another. So pastors, stop being partisan. It's nonsense, and I don't think it's valuable. I think the key there is to teach biblical theology in a way that makes everyone mad. The Imago Dei teaches us that every human being is born in the image and likeness of God and deserves respect and honor. So that means that God cares about the unborn, but he also cares about the immigrant. God cares about every human being, whether it be American, Iranian, or Iraqi. He cares about all of us, and that changes our foreign policy. It makes the Democrats look bad, and it makes the Republicans look bad too. And I say to that, good. My job is not to make one party look good or bad. My job is to preach the gospel as best I can. And, neither party's on God's side, as far as I can tell. I'll end with one quick parable. There's the parable of the sower that Jesus uses, talking about a farmer who goes out and spreads seed and he says that some lands on rocky ground and can't take up root because it's on rocks, and some lands on shallow soil and the sun comes and bakes it and the plants don't grow up. But a small portion of it lands on good soil and yields a huge harvest. The purpose of that story is to tell us to keep throwing seed, that where it lands is not our responsibility. It's someone else's responsibility. It's God's responsibility. Our church is a little church in Mount Vernon, Illinois. When I got there in 2006, we had 50 people. We had 30 people about 7 years ago, and now we're down to about a dozen. One thing that we started to do about 15 years ago was what's called Brown Bag Friday, which is to pack a brown paper sack full of food items for kids in our public school system. My kids go to public school. 85% of kids in my public school are on free or reduced lunch. It's one of the poorest districts in the state. And the social workers were telling us there were kids who would come on Monday who couldn't focus because they were hungry because they had nothing to eat over the weekend. So we thought, well, we can fix that problem. So we packed these brown paper sacks. We actually, over the course of the entire program, packed over 100,000 brown paper sacks of food for these kids in the local public school system. We put a little paper in there that said, "We're First Baptist Church. We don't know you, but we love you. If you need anything, here's our number." That's it. No proselytizing, no tracts, no nothing like that. Well, a couple years ago, we got a call from a grandmother on a Friday, because I got the bags on Friday. She said, "Winter's coming. I can't afford a coat. Can you help?" Well, we just so happened to be having a rummage sale that weekend. We said, "Come on down. You can take whatever you want." So she came down with her grandson, and she filled up 3 big old grocery bags full of clothes for her grandson and for her. And I didn't get her name, and I didn't get his name, and I don't care to get their names. What I know is that kid had a group of people who loved him that did not know him. Our job, as far as I understand, is to throw the seed. I hope that kid becomes the next Billy Graham, because he's gonna have a great story about how our church changed the world. But even if he doesn't, I hope he's sitting at a bar when he's 25 and someone says something mean about religion. And I hope he stands up and says, "Yeah, but not all religion's bad, because that church helped me when I needed a coat." Our job is to throw seed. I think the ground is getting rockier, it's getting shallower, but that does not preclude us from doing the job that we're called to do as followers of Jesus Christ, which is love people, serve people, and build the kingdom of God however and whenever we can. We must continue to throw seed and then let someone else worry about the harvest. That's on God, and that's God's timing. So I'll stop there. There's my little publicity slide. I always throw that up real quick. I've written a number of books, 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America. The Nun, second edition, what I told you about. I had a book called The Great Dechurching that just came out in August. We did 3 surveys about why people leave religion and what would bring them back. It was the total surveys cost $90,000. So it was a huge survey effort to get this book put together. I'm also the faith director for a group called Faith Facts, which is a group that basically just tries to tell people there's good parts to religion. The social science evidence actually points to the validity and positivity of religion in American life. It does all kinds of good things for your mental health, for your physical health, for your social health. And we need to hear more and more about that, because all we hear is pastors steal your money and churches sexually abuse children and all these negative things. Well, our job is to try to counter that with data that says that religion can be a force for good in a functioning society. I also write a Substack called Graphs About Religion, 2 posts a week. You sign up. I email you some data Monday and Thursday every week about what's going on in American religion, so you can sign up there at the Substack. So I will stop and let you all barrage me with wonderful questions, I'm sure. And I went 5 minutes too long, Diane. I apologize.
That's okay. I have a question, or just an observation,
Sure.
and I'll start off. There's a certain percentage of young nothing in particulars that are not joining churches because no one in their age group is attending church. So they don't feel they want to join an organization and be the only one there
Yeah.
in their age category. Do you think this is true?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, because I've seen it. People walk in my church, young person, young couple, sit
Mhm.
down and go, "Oh, I've made a terrible mistake," because it's just me and a bunch of 70-year-old folks, and they want to be around people their own age. Now the problem is, it's like, you go first. No, you go first. Like, it's no one can like figure out who's going to go first.
Mhm.
So what I counsel churches is, what you should do is you should find a group of young families who like to hang out and then start a church. Like, find the core group and then build church around that, as opposed to waiting for those people. And so whatever you can do to make that easier is what I would recommend. So things like free daycare, but not just like free Sunday school, like daycare, but also like, hey, it's Friday night. You want your kids to come to the church and we'll watch them so you couples can go out and have dinner together? We'd love to do that, right? Find ways to create space for those young families to be more like, because at the end of the day, they're people just like you, and they want the church to give them something at this point in their life.
Mhm.
Give them some things, give them some reasons to want to come. Because right now, I think one of the problems with the main line is there's just no young people, and it's hard to start. Like, you can't start with that. So that's not an easy problem to solve. I don't have a good answer for that. I think the right answer is probably, I was talking to someone the other day, wouldn't it, like, if like 4 young couples joined like a small mainline church, wouldn't they like take it over pretty soon? I go, yeah, but I don't think they would mind that very much. Um, they would probably be pretty happy with you taking that over. So, I think it's not, there's no easy answers here.
Yeah. Okay, Jean Dudek, you have a question.
Hi there. I was particularly interested in your graph where the line for men crossed over the line for women.
Yeah.
And you said you're going to look into that. And I myself have some ideas, but no point in my telling you things you already know. Can you tell me what you are thinking so far about why that has happened?
Yeah, so I think the most likely culprit is the rise in masculine Christianity that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is probably a big part of it. Because what's happened is young men are coming back. So there's a guy named Mark Driscoll who ran a church in Seattle called Mars Hill, and his whole thing was like, men, stop being boys. Like, get married, get a job, raise kids. Like UFC Jesus. You guys know what UFC is? It's like bare knuckle fighting. Like UFC Jesus, like big burly, like testosterone addled Jesus. And a lot of men were attracted to that because, like, the picture they saw Jesus like wearing like flowy robes and looking all feminine and stuff. So, like, giving him like a positive Jesus thing was good. So, I think that drew men in, but the opposite reaction was it pushed women out because it was like, wait a minute, I don't want like super masculine Jesus. I like nurturing Jesus and like love the children Jesus and that kind of Jesus. So, I think that's part of it. But I also think you can't deny the fact that the patriarchy, a lot of churches are patriarchal. Women don't have access to leadership and evangelical churches. And on top of that, I think, the issue of abortion, you can't discount Dobbs and what it's done. I think a lot of women who did not care a whole lot about abortion now care a whole lot about abortion because they lost something they had for a long time. And they see that religion, or at least they perceive religion as the driver of things like Dobbs. And so they're rejecting that. The other thing, and I'll go quick on this, is that there's some evidence that young men are becoming more conservative. They're actually, and I think a lot of it's the push away from the Democratic Party's move on things like transgender rights, and embrace of gay folks has turned a lot of like middle of the road white dudes away from the Democrats and toward religion. And I think so. I think it's like this kind of mix and match of all those things has led to where we are today.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking the patriarchal notion of religion is a big thing, especially as women are expecting to have equal opportunities, and that doesn't always happen in churches. I was also keeping an eye out when you listed where various slides listed different religions, if Wiccan would show up on one, and I didn't see that anywhere. And I think that more female-centered religion is a lot more appealing to women, and I'm wondering if that's part of what's going on.
Yeah, Wiccans are so small. Like from a numbers perspective, if you put it down, we'd probably get 1 out of 1,000 people say they're Wiccans. So we can't statistically do a whole lot with that. I will say this: there's been some evidence, and I've seen this, that the mainline churches that tend to be more female-centric are the ones that are doing okay with women. They're actually becoming predominantly women. But here's something fascinating that if you look at the literature on this, in evangelical churches, the most religiously conservative people are women in those churches because they feel like they have to justify their existence because they don't have access to power. So what they do is become hyper conservative as a way to say, I belong here and I'm just as good as the men folk are. So there's actually tons of evidence that say that women are actually more likely to be biblical literalists in evangelical churches than men are, because they have to prove themselves day over day. So it's this weird bifurcation, right? Liberal women seek out different spaces. Conservative women want to be in evangelical churches, and they actually want to be super involved in evangelical churches.
Wow.
Interesting.
It is.
Any other questions?
I have one.
We have one in the room.
Oh, go ahead.
We're not partisans here, and this is not to be partisan. This is strictly a demographic data-driven question. What are the three things that you think Donald Trump offers to evangelical Christians?
Why are you making me have to talk about things like this? Okay. So
The Iowa caucuses are tomorrow.
yes, they are. And I actually have a post on my Substack about Iowa's Iowa's not nearly a religious state as people think it is, by the way. It's actually probably the least religious state in that region, but people don't believe me. Okay, so what I've been asked the question, why do evangelicals support Donald Trump about 1,000 times the last 5 or 6 years, including by Anderson Cooper in an interview with him where he asked me the same question 3 times, like he was not happy with my answer, it felt like. Donald Trump, I think the reason that he rose to power initially was because if you look at the 2016 primary vote, Donald Trump won Republicans who attended never, seldom, monthly, and weekly. He actually did better than Ted Cruz in every category except those who attended church more than once a week, which is less than 10% of the electorate. So he actually won weekly attenders. Now, he won it by smaller margins than the never attenders, but he won every category except the more than once a week. The only thing I can think of is that his stance on immigration actually tapped a vein that evangelicals have wanted to talk about for a long time, but Republican politicians were afraid to say things like Mexicans are rapists. There's a strain of xenophobia and racism in American Republicans, and I live in a rural area. I see it every single day. And Trump was willing to say the quiet part out loud, and I think a lot of evangelicals like that. Now, why do they continue to support him in 2024, even though he lost in 2020? I think a big reason is because he gave evangelicals what they wanted. And for many of them, the ends justify the means. He put an end to Roe versus Wade. George W. Bush did not do that. Ronald Reagan did not do that. Okay. Republicans would give lip service to evangelicals for decades about how they wanted to end abortion. And when the rubber met the road, they would not do it. Donald Trump is an empty vessel, which means he says he's transactional. If you vote for me, I will give you this. Even though I don't believe in that, I don't like that policy. If you do this, then I will do that. That's exactly the kind of politician that evangelicals wanted, an unprincipled person. And that's who they got. And he gave them exactly what they wanted, which was an end to abortion in like 15 states across America. In their minds, they won. And so I think that's a big part of it. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. I also think Donald Trump just has an insanely good understanding of what people want to hear. And so when you hear him talk about like, oh, the election was stolen for me, or all these prosecutions are all, illegitimate, what he's really saying is, I went to Washington to reform Washington, and look what they did to me. They stole the election from me. They're trumping up these charges against me that are all false. What he's almost saying is Jesus died for your sins because he was rejected by the establishment. I went to Washington to fight for you, and look what's happening to me. I'm being persecuted because of you, fighting for you and what you want. And I think a lot of Christian people go, yes, I want a fighter. And that guy is a fighter. And they like that persecution narrative, and they kind of see him. I'm not going to go as far as they see him as Messiah, but they see him as sort of a quasi savior for them politically. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
On that note.
Not to
Yes.
bum you all out, but there you go.
No, but thank you.
No, thank you.
Really enlightening. Really enlightening.
If I will share the PowerPoint, I'll email it to you, Diane, and if you
Okay.
want to distribute it to the
All
folks,
right.
We
that's
really
totally fine with
appreciate
me.
it.
Do we
Yeah.
have time for one more question?
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm good. If you guys want to ask one more, it's fine with me.
Okay.
I don't know where the mic is.
I'm just wondering about, I guess the Protestant world, we have so many denominations. What is the prospect of perhaps forming a national Protestant church by sort of consolidating the assets and focusing on, like you said, the things that we really should be focusing about rather than sectarianism within Protestant mainline?
Oh, what a like a John Lennon Imagine All the People situation, right? Where we could all just like join together and clasp hands and work in unison. There's a book by Niebuhr called The Social Sources of Denominationalism, where he basically argues that Protestant denominations were inevitable because every church, the more you try to become more things to more people, the more people you're going to anger by doing that. So the more you reach in this direction, the more you expose that side of things. And so denominations were almost inevitable because churches cannot be everything to everyone. Now, I will say this. I do think the mainline, and they're not going to, I've talked to mainline leadership about this. They don't like me saying this. They're going to have real conversations in the next 5 to 10 years about who they're going to join with in the future. Because a denomination with 300,000 people, the Episcopalians have 375,000 worshipers across the country now. You can't sustain that for a long period of time. The PCUSA had 3.1 million members in 1987, has 1.1 million members today. you're not going to exist in 30 years. So who is there? Some of the mainline traditions are going to have to find a way to join together, at least organizationally, to make sure that they persist and exist in 50 years. So I think that is probably the most likely thing that happens. Now, the undercurrent behind all this, I talk about the rise of the nuns a lot. The second biggest story in my mind is the rise of the nons, which is non-denominationals. In 1972, 2% of all Americans were non-denominational. Now it's 15% of all Americans are non-denominational. There are 22 million non-denominational Protestants in America. That's more than the Southern Baptists and the United Methodists combined. So we are seeing actually more fracturing of American Protestantism today than at any point in American history, because non-denominationals are their own denominations, and there are thousands of them across America. So I think that we will never be able to join hands. And even look at the Catholic Church. They're one universal church, and they're having all kinds of problems right now because some are liberal, some are conservative. Some people want to do Latin Mass. Some people don't want to do Latin Mass. Under the surface of the Catholic Church is absolute turmoil and turbulence because they're trying to hold together congregations that are incredibly fractured politically, theologically, racially, culturally. It is hard to hold a large organization together. So I just think it's inevitable that we're going to continue to have more fracturing in American religion, especially American Protestantism.
Wow.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, we're 20 after 10, and some folks who would like to go to church, they're going to be going. So we're going to say thank you, Dr. Burge. We really appreciated you coming today, and it was really enlightening. And we just give your blessings. And
Hey,
Yes.
grace
Thank
and
you.
peace to all of you, and go in peace to love and serve your neighbors.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And we'll look forward to a discussion, biblical discussion with Pastor Gray next week.
Mhm.
So look forward to seeing everybody then. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank
you all.
you.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Yes.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Thank you so much.